and get going. So thank you all for joining us today. I just want to kind of give a little bit of a rundown as to what to expect. I'm going to go through kind of the presentation that I've prepped here. The presentation is more so giving context to the report itself. I didn't really want to go through the report itself line by line because I already did a whole bunch of talking in the report. And I kind of want to let that talking speak for itself and then give that a little bit of context. And then depending on how much time is left, we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. I'm hoping to use the breakout room feature on Zoom so that we can kind of break into smaller groups of like 7 or 8 and kind of discuss reactions and then come back to a larger group and talk a little bit amongst ourselves as a larger group as well. So with that being said, I'm going to leave everyone unmuted. So feel free if you have like a question to stop me as we go along. That way, you know, we can keep up and everybody's on the same page. So don't worry about interrupting me. I'll be more than ready to expect that. So I will share my screen. We'll get started. All right, can everyone see this? Of course, I can't see anybody anymore, so I don't know.
Yes, we can.
We can. I can see it.
Yes.
And you can see the little smiley face I just drew too.
Sure.
Yes, we can.
Yep, I can
That's
see
what it is.
Fantastic.
Smiley face, it looks like a heart.
Right, so I
Let's
need
not get the criticisms going before we even start, Betty.
What can I tell you? I've been cooped up.
That's all right. That is all right. So again, today we are discussing the results of the survey that we took this past fall. The kind of the purpose of the survey was to help us see us where we are, kind of through the lens of discernment and the different aspects of congregational vitality, which I'll explain in a little bit. And this is kind of where we're going to root ourselves as we walk forward into the spring and continue our discussions. So one of the first things that I want to start off with is revisiting a little bit, very as briefly as I can, the topics that we covered in our spring or our fall presentations about particularly the church experience of the 1950s. You'll hear me call it the 1950s model of church sometimes. And what that kind of refers to is what church really became in the 1950s. There was a boom in the economy, a boom in the population, and a boom in organized religion in post-war America in the 1950s. And Christianity really rode that boom pretty well. America was really a Protestant Christian-centric society during that period. Church attendance and giving were social norms. Church was a family affair. And churches really flourished during this time because of that centrality that they experienced to the culture of America. You know, we had congregations popping up everywhere, and even the churches that had been there, you know, for centuries before that period were experiencing boom at that time. A lot of that had to do with the economic prosperity of the time. You know, it was a very labor-driven society, so there were a lot of jobs to be had at that time, and people were were experiencing some good economic prosperity at the time. Like I said before, there were churches that were popping up everywhere, and so because there was a lot of demand for a religious experience and organized religious experience in that sense. And so the goals of this 1950s model of church were to strengthen those institutions that were popping up, you know, through increasing membership and participation in the programs that were available at that point. And the life of the congregation really revolved around this institution, since, that was its purpose. Churches during this time didn't really have to do a whole lot of hard work to grow because of the centrality of the church within American culture at that time. So, of course, things have changed since then. Some of the things that have changed are the decentralizing of Christianity in American society. Christianity is no longer the primary faith expression in a more globalized and secular America. There's increasing diversity, which has brought about many new faith options for people to explore. And this decentralization has kind of taken away the social norms that drove people through church doors without much work on the end of it. So fewer people are church shopping nowadays than they were back in the 50s. And part of what has changed too is the increasing distrust of institutions and distrust in church. A lot of philosophical thought that has developed since the 70s, this what I've referred to in the fall as postmodern thought, is a much more self-critical and interrogating, for lack of a better word, philosophy. And institutions are subjected to that. So a lot of people are starting to really question churches as a whole, and kind of seeing them as hypocritical in some ways. So there's a distrust that churches around the country experience, whether it's the individual churches that have done it, there is an attitude towards Christianity now that is much less, much different than it was in the 1950s. Another big change that has happened is that worship is less central in the faith experience of younger generations, and mission opportunities are much more central to the faith experience of younger generations. So we're seeing, a landslide trend in the last 30 years of decline in worship participation. Particularly, as the younger the generation, the fewer members of that generation actually attend church or attend worship. That is so. Also, some of the things that have changed too are that the local community that the church used to thrive in the 50s has likely changed drastically too. Church engagement strategies tend to have not changed. And one of the things that we're starting to learn is that, as a community changes, so do their needs. And the needs that were previously met by churches are now no longer kind of the primary needs of the community. Another part that's kind of come up since the 50s is the rise of secular nonprofits that have become the primary source of mission work in societies, which draws money away from churches. People want to donate to a cause, and they see nonprofits as a great way to do that. Give me 1 second here. We've got a few people in the waiting room. All right. Another hallmark of kind of the changes that we've seen since the 50s is the economic uncertainty of the time right now. Stocks are doing well right now, but unemployment is up. Financial instability of the middle class is really eroding very quickly. And people are more suspicious and cautious with their money, and they want to know that if they are going to put their money somewhere, that it's going to a cause that they care about, and that it's going directly to that cause, which causes people to be a little bit more hesitant to give. Another thing that has changed is just the pace of life for families nowadays. Busy schedules cause a real big competition for time. And I touched on it a little bit already, but to kind of revisit it, we're kind of experiencing a de-institutionalizing of society. One of the great examples of this, I think, is the deinstitutionalization of print journalism. The online and internet platforms that have been created have really accelerated a decline in the need for physical print journalism. And so a lot of the energy is being focused on there, which leaves, these institutions that really boomed and grew kind of scrambling. You see the Hartford Courant, who, just left their building in Hartford, and now no longer have a physical newsroom, and they don't print in that location anymore. They have outsourced their printing as well. So that's kind of an example outside of church where the deinstitutionalizing of American society is at play. Within churches, there's a new multitude of faith and spiritual formation options that are now accessible anywhere at any time, thanks to the internet. Sermons on podcasts, worship videos online, all of these things have influenced kind of the deinstitutionalizing of church. And one of the challenges of this is that, institutional costs, like property upkeep and administrative costs, are really difficult to maintain in a society where deinstitutionalizing is happening and where it's affecting, the things like church, things like print journalism. Those big institutional costs are really kind of weighing on these organizations. And especially so because people want to see that their money, if they are donating, is going directly to the cause that they feel is important to them. So moving on a little bit and changing subjects, in the report, I kind of identified Center Church as a church on life support. And I'm going to go into a little bit for those of you that weren't at the first discernment presentation in the fall where we talked about the local church life cycle. I'm going to do my best to capture what a life support congregation is. So we have the life cycle curve here. We have the very beginning of a church's life down in this corner, which is launch. And then we kind of grow and grow and grow until a congregation has reached a point of sustained health. One of the points I made back in the fall was that sustained health is not a static state by any means. It's not a point where you just reach and you kind of don't have to do work to maintain it. It's really kind of a cycle between these three stages in a life cycle where you reach sustained health, and then you get comfortable in it and you start to fall into a mode of like maintaining that. But then, once you start to fall into this maintenance mode, you have to kind of avoid the complacency that precedes that or preservation, and find new ways to achieve strategic growth, which will bring you back into sustained health. So it's really kind of a miniature cycle in and of itself here, where it's not a static state where work can stop. It's a continued state of working. And then you've got the other side of the bell curve where you go down into preservation, and then down here is life support. One of the things about this model of looking at church health is that, just because we're down here doesn't mean that, the death that's like right here is necessary. It doesn't necessitate that, you're going to get to this point. You can always move back over to the other side of the curve. But when you're at this point, you really, to have the best effect, you have to go back to the launch point. And, I'm not going to really go too far into launch right now. I'd invite you to go, when you have some time, go to our website. We've got our discernment page on the website where you can find the video where we kind of go over the whole cycle in and of itself. Another point to make too is that, when we're in a situation like we're in we often want to like compare ourselves to other churches. And, there's sometimes where that's helpful, but we have to understand too, especially as mainline Protestant churches in America, that, a lot of times when we see a church that's doing better than us, it's more so the case that, they're probably somewhere higher up along this downward trend, that they're still trending downwards. They just haven't slid as far yet. So that, sometimes we can see other churches that may look healthier than us, and want to imitate them, want to learn from them. And I think there are certain things that we can learn from those churches. But, there is we want to avoid making the mistake that seeing those churches as on this side of the curve. Some of them are for sure, but for the most part, in mainline Protestant denominations that are seeing a ton of decline, they are more so on this side of the curve. Some general characteristics about life support congregations. Their focus at this point is trying to reach new people with methods that previously worked. We have this memory of, the thriving church in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and knowing that those strategies worked at that point. But kind of what we're coming to terms with now is that those methods that previously worked are no longer working. And so we have to try and find ways to adapt. In a life support congregation, change can be difficult to come by. We really love the traditions that we've created, and we love the things that we do. And we really get a lot out of those things. So it's tough to, pick and choose what we need to trim away or what we need to invest more in, because we don't necessarily want to take on the emotional toll that can bring. Another kind of general characteristic of life support congregations is that the church is aging. There is a kind of a lacking in presence of younger generations. So the aging of that church kind of foreshadows a shorter future than other congregations tend to see. And there's also a heavy focus on paying bills and keeping the doors open. And keeping that institution alive. This can start to lead toward depleting resources of time and energy and finances too, which can really start to get people frustrated. That naturally tends to lend itself to the point where blame and discontent start to take root. And when that kind of starts to happen, the blame and the discontent can often lead to making change even more difficult to come by. Another characteristic is that, the budget cuts that a lot of churches in the life support phase start to see are made to preserve the financial and institutional lifespan of the church. Again, tying back to that focus on paying the bills and keeping the doors open. Another characteristic is that leadership is driven by a pretty small group of key donors or families. And another characteristic that's likely to be found in a life support congregation is that congregation looks very different than the community that immediately surrounds their church. That's kind of some of what many congregations experience, is that, when back in the 50s, when things were booming, their congregation and the demographic within the congregation was primarily something was reflecting the community at the time. But since then, the demographics of the community have changed, and in many cases, the congregation hasn't really reflected that change. That's not through the congregation's own fault. There's a lot to unpack as far as diversity within the church, because religion, Sunday mornings there's that common phrase that Sunday mornings are the most segregated hour in America. And I think that's still the case. And I think it has a lot to do with how different experiences among racial and ethnic groups play into their religious experience as well. So kind of to go through the statistics that were found at the end of the report, that kind of support this narrative of our congregation being in this life support stage. We're looking at kind of a 10-year look at our reported membership. And you see back in 2009, we were reporting 285 members. And that's had a steady decline to this point in 2009, where we reported 123 members. Average worship attendance has not had quite the sharpest decline. You see that 92 number 10 years ago down to 50. It's a little bit less of a sharp decline than the previous one. So there's kind of that going, but still that decline from 2009 to 2019. We also looked at committee involvement. You see kind of in the blue, we have the number of people that were serving on boards and committees. And in the red, you have the number of positions on a nominating slate. So you see back in 2009, we had 68 positions with 49 people filling those positions. And then you see a little bit of a drop here in 2011, which was due to the bylaw changes that happened there. So we saw this drop from 68 down to 58. But then another drop in involvement there, which was interesting to me. I don't necessarily know what would have constituted that. But there was those two drops significantly in 2011. And then the next drop in committee involvement happened in 2016. We all know that 2015, 2016 was a pretty tumultuous time for this congregation. So I would attribute that drop to, the conflict and the discontent of that time. And so you kind of see that, since then it's kind of remained steadily around 31, 32 average. And again, the positions have kind of fluctuated only just because the reports that I went over had kind of just differences in the amounts of positions that they were putting forward. We also took a look at pledge income over the last 16 years. So we started in 2004 and went to 2020. But you can kind of see this steady decline, and then you see this dramatic decline here. Again, the 2015, 2016 time where there was a lot going on, a lot of conflict, which, when there's conflict present at a church, pledging can tend to be a symptom of that conflict and that discontent. We also see our operating expenses for the last 16 years are on a steady decline, what we're spending on our ministries. We had a peak in 2015, and then 2016, I believe was the third highest amount spent on, third or fourth highest amount spent in operating expenses in this window. But that was also the year. So if you look, we had $243,000 in expenses that year compared to the $86,000 in pledging. So there was that very large deficit that year, which resulted in 2017, there was a lot of budget cuts. I believe that was the year that a few of our staffing positions were cut back further to kind of make up for that deficit. And then just to kind of give this number a little bit of context, this looks like a dramatic decline. 2019 is, so low just because there wasn't really a minister for good portions of those years. So there was not a lot of money going towards the minister's salaries at that point, and as well in 2020. And then we come to the endowment. This is the unrestricted endowment year-end balance over 16 years. This number is actually, if you can see the trend line here, steadily increased. So you can see in 2004, the year-end balance was at 1.185 million, and this year in 2020 at year's end, the balance was at 1.181 million, $1,181,000. So that endowment has been well preserved and has shown to be pretty resilient over the years. The age range of the congregation, if you have the survey out or the survey report out, you can find this data on page 4. So we're looking at this pie chart right here that shows 86% of the congregation that was surveyed falls within this portion of the chart. So 86% of the congregation surveyed was aged 50 or older. You had 70% that were aged 60 and older, and then 50% that were these are rough numbers, roughly 70% and roughly 50%. Roughly 70 are 60 and older, and roughly 50% are 70 and older. So again, kind of reflecting that sense of it's an aging congregation, and then with a remaining 14% of the surveyed respondents identifying as 26 or 20 between 39 and kind of that youth age. We didn't have any surveys responded that came within the 40 to 49 crowd either. So I know there are people that do fit that age demographic within the church too. So that's one thing to know. Then we also took a look at the longevity of membership and involvement in the church. So you can see strikingly that roughly 70% of the church has been involved in the church for 30 plus years, which means that, they feel very connected to this church and they are really devoted to the congregation, and have been here for a long time because of that. You've got roughly 10% each coming in at the 20 to 30 and the 10 to 20. And then you've got the remaining, math is hard, remaining 10%, between 1 to 10 years here. So some of the needs that congregations in life support have, are the pursuit of vitality. There is, at this point, if congregations are pursuing vitality and not considering, some other alternative options, it's really kind of a reboot at this point. There has to be the embracing of a new mission, which means kind of clarifying and redefining what purpose the church serves and evaluating whether that purpose actually meets the needs of the community around them. Really what it comes down to is kind of clarifying and maybe perhaps reimagining, why the church exists. It also includes understanding the needs of the community around them and reconstructing that purpose to focus on those needs. Again, in the 1950s, church boomed because the needs of the community were met by a religious organization. And so, we have, as the community around us changes, that kind of necessitates, if we want to pursue that vitality, adapting to that adapting community. It also includes casting a new vision out of that new purpose. This is where you begin to figure out, how the congregation can meet those needs and engage the community where they are. And the reason I emphasize engaging the community where they are is because, that 1950s model of church relied on people coming through the doors to worship. And that was the primary touch point. That's really, no longer the case because of the decline in worship attendance and the decline in people that are church shopping in the traditional way that we understand church shopping. So we have to figure out how we can meet the community where they are, and we have to understand that how will ultimately take some energy away from the existing activities that we're used to. But in that change that we'll experience at this point, we have to really embrace the uncertainty of it all. You have to prepare for the sacrifices that will be needed, and be intentional about experiencing hope. I like to say that, transformation without hope is just death, not resurrection. We're a resurrection people as being Christians. So we in our faith understand that, death is not an end, but a beginning. And so finding the hope in that is something that, we're going to work on, I think, in the next few months, and kind of come to understand a little bit more, and hopefully begin to embody that sense of hope and finding positivity in things that we might not have always found positivity in thinking about in the past. It also requires this path of pursuing independent vitality requires going all in on that new mission and vision, allocating financial and volunteer resources to those growth points that we've identified, and the need, and finding new ways to engage new perspectives. All of these things are going to take a really all-in mindset to be able to get them to do what we really want them to do. We also have to be willing to make mistakes. One of the things about, this era that we're in is that most churches really have no idea what church is going to look like in 20 to 30 years. So, one of the things that we have to understand is that, there's not going to be a path that we can pick where anything is a guarantee, and we might make mistakes along the way. And making mistakes is okay. That's how we learn and how we adjust and how we continue on into the future. And going all in also requires being bold and unconventional in the strategic planning. Again, that conventional wisdom of governing church that was born in the 1950s really is tough to make fit in this new era. So that being bold and unconventional and creative is going to be a huge part of any path forward. Another alternative, the last slide was talking about pursuing vitality independently. A lot of life support congregations will pursue vitality through partnership. That either means giving the reins to another church. This means identifying a growing congregation in the local community that has outgrown their space and that would thrive in the space that we do have. And it also, in some cases, means gifting them ownership of those physical assets. A lot of times growing congregations don't necessarily have a ton of funds to be able to purchase a big space, but I know in the Baptist realm, a lot of dying churches in the Baptist realm will start to will go this route and kind of, it's almost called grandfathering another church or grandparenting another church, where they, accept them in and kind of help them out. I know my grandmother, every time I go to her house, I end up leaving with like $20, and I don't understand why I left with $20, but I did. So it's that kind of giving of our resources to help a growing congregation. And in return, we get to retain ownership of that space. So churches will tend to go that route sometimes. It's a little bit less popular in the UCC because there's less church planting going on in the UCC. That's not been an area of focus for very long in the United Church of Christ. So, this identification of a growing congregation would be tough in the United Church of Christ. This kind of need would also require the understanding that space sharing of that magnitude would require sacrifice and giving up some significant control. Any path that we pursue that would involve, more rentals or more space sharing, as methods of engaging the community would require kind of that sacrifice and giving up some of our physical spaces to the use of other groups. We also see, using financial savings that we get on, allowing some other another congregation to kind of overtake management. We can use the financial savings to invest in new strategies. Again, I'm not presenting this as a path, but this is just kind of talking about what some life support churches will do in their own cases. Another thing that some life support churches will tend to do is identify a church to unite with. Rather than giving the reins to another congregation, they'll take their liquidated assets to a healthier church with similar values in the region to kind of help bolster a united congregation. Responsibilities are shared within this new united faith community, but you do get to keep some of the unique parts of the identity and the soul of the congregation. Those things can be preserved if a unification is done well. And so this brings us to a point that I want to kind of talk about in the idea of pursuing vitality. It's a clarification that I think a lot of churches don't fully understand. And so vitality, as I kind of understand it in the church context, refers to an organization's relevancy within its community. Organizations are created with a purpose in mind. All churches are created with a purpose in mind. Our own congregation was formed out of a need for the northern farmers that were involved with Wallingford Church to have their own space that they didn't have to travel as far to. So that was kind of the birthplace, the birth need of Center Church in Meriden, was that need for their own space that was a little bit more regionally accessible. If an organization is not meeting the needs of its local community, its vitality will suffer because they're experiencing less engagement. Churches across the country flourished in that post-war America when Protestant Christianity was at its most popular, and its centrality to that culture really boosted its vitality because what it provided was really relevant to a large majority of the population. The unfortunate thing, though, is that experience of church from the 50s and 60s that is kind of stretched on for decades afterwards is really no longer a central part of that American culture. And resisting that can often bring a lot more frustration than results. And so this is kind of what has led and catalyzed the nationwide decline in churches that are shaped in this kind of 1950s identity. While there are new churches sprouting up and thriving, their model looks vastly different and has kind of adapted to that deinstitutionalized model. So they look very different from, this idea of church that we're much more familiar with. One of the distinctions I want to make is between growth and vitality. So we named in our survey that we want to grow, which I think is a hope that every church experiences, and that's absolutely great. One of the things that we need to understand is that growth is a symptom. It's not a root cause or a root goal, and it happens out of the cause, which is vitality. And again, vitality, an organization's vitality is dependent on how relevant that organization and its purpose or its mission is to the community that it's located in. Vital organizations meet specific needs within their communities. And if there's a disconnect between the needs of the community and the work of an organization, its vitality will suffer. And so that's really what vitality is the sense of relevancy and the sense of purposeful connection to the community. Growth is really it's engagement in the mission of the organization. That's a little bit more general of a definition than many churches kind of think of when they think of growth, because we think of growth out of this 1950s model of church. The growth goals and the mission goals were to grow their church at that time. And they were doing it very well. And so that reflected itself in more members coming in and worshiping on Sunday and more pledging. But growth can be reflected in a number of ways that are more specific to the goals of the mission of the organization. So growth is not necessarily limited to, money and worship attendance. It can be reflected in in many other ways. One thing that I think churches do a lot is pursuing growth without pursuing vitality. You can do that, absolutely. But pursuing vitality before growth is much more likely to produce the sustainable engagement that we want. And so there's, again, I kind of touched on it just then, but there's differences in understandings of vitality and growth. So this 1950s model that we've been talking about, the primary community needs were able to be met within the institutional church setting, which made it a vital part of that community's culture. Programs that happened within the building were the norm and were really popular in that time. And along the way, the purpose became simply to bring more people under their umbrella to share in that experience. Markers of growth in the 1950s model revolved around bringing more people into and supporting the institution, which resulted in membership and money and pledging becoming a focus. And it came naturally as the church setting kind of thrived off of its central place in the community culture. And then you come to, what I've been kind of dubbing the new church model, this reimagining of what it means to be church and how we might attempt to reimagine that. You're looking and understanding that, there's complex and community needs that are being met outside of the institutional church setting, and that those needs have shifted outside of church. So reflecting the changes to the community and reflecting the new needs of that community within the mission and purpose of the church might help boost engagement within that community. Growth will be difficult and won't come quickly because, it takes a lot of adjustment to the mission. And it takes time to develop strategies, and it takes time for those strategies to kind of work. And growth, too, will also be defined differently than membership and financial support to the institution. We can pursue those things for sure, but those things will be very difficult to pursue in the future. Kind of in continuing, and this kind of ties into the sections of the survey report, there are different aspects of church vitality. We've got change in imagination, mission and evangelism, growth points, and energy. In change and imagination, we've got this phrase here that says we're shaped by what we know. Our ability to imagine has its foundations in the realities that we've experienced. Our willingness and ability to change is also dependent on our ability to imagine too. So our hopes, as we've kind of said, are really rooted in growth of what already is, because we're so connected to what is. We want to see it succeed. We want to see it grow. Those of us that are still connected here are connected to those strategies that have worked for us for the period of time that we've been involved in this church. Unfortunately, though, growth in the 21st century is going to look different. The needs of the community have shifted, and we're going to have to adapt to those needs to be able to continue to be a relevant presence in the community. And so our ability to imagine something new and transform ourselves is a crucial factor in decision making going forward. Can we, aspire to transform and be something new, is going to be a question that we'll have to consider as we continue our conversations this spring. Pressing into change and imagination kind of requires the cultivation of an imagination and understanding of what church is that is not limited to our context or previous experience. We can really sometimes run into the mistake of believing that our sense of, what church is, what our religion is the universal experience of what church and religion are to other people. This world has nearly 8 billion people in it, and they all experience life very differently. And, church is the very same way. What we understand to be religion and what we understand faith to be is rooted in our context and our own personal experience. We have to understand too that vitality can only come through adapting to the world and the community around us. It also requires beginning to open ourselves up to new possibilities and finding the hope in those new possibilities. That's one adjustment that can be really tough to make, is because, the opening of ourselves also requires the opening ourselves to the sacrifices that we might have to make going forward. And finding the hope on the other side of those sacrifices is really important, and is kind of a core tenet of our faith, is being able to find hope beyond, sacrifice. We're, like I said earlier, we are a resurrection people. And that is, the faith of Jesus Christ, is being able to hope beyond the grave and hope beyond death. We also have to understand that the adaptations needed to pursue vitality will be far-reaching and could ruffle feathers. This is not going to be a cakewalk by any means. But when we prioritize our community, and that's something that came through very clearly in the survey responses, was that this community prioritizes the people. When we continue to prioritize the people and the relationships that we have with one another, it will help kind of make this a much more peaceful and much more calm process. We also, when pressing into change and imagine, have to begin to discern what needs to change in order to promote growth as well. Second aspect that I talked about is mission and evangelism. We have to root our vitality in the needs of the community, which requires understanding the community and engaging those needs in meaningful ways. And reflecting the community is the best way to get that community to engage. Back in the 1950s, again, the purpose of church was a mission that many related to. Many saw value in it, and many were drawn to it because of that. And unfortunately, that's no longer the case. So shifting our mission and shifting our purpose and shifting our vision, which is how we achieve our purpose, will need to change kind of in order to continue pursuing vitality. So when enhancing mission and evangelism, you have to start working towards, a healthy understanding of evangelism. One of the questions that we talked about, or that was talked about in the survey, was, what do we hear when we hear the words evangelism? And evangelical Christianity tended to be our understanding of evangelical Christianity tended to be a popular response in that, which, absolutely, I think that's something that we all, myself included, kind of think of when we think of that word evangelism. And something that, Protestant churches, mainline Protestant churches like the UCC, are a little more hesitant to do, is to do evangelizing work. But there are healthy ways that, I kind of go a little bit further into this in the report itself, but there are healthy ways of understanding evangelism. And so growing our comfort level and sharing in faith and prayer with one another is going to be a huge step in doing that. Being able to know and articulate what our faith inspires us to do in the world, and being able to articulate that to others in our community is a huge part of this. And being able to tell compelling stories about the life change present in our work is going to be very important as well. It also, enhancing mission and evangelism will kind of require reconstructing the mission, which means getting to know and learning about the needs of the surrounding community, and then restructuring the mission of the church to reflect the needs of the community. And out of that new purpose and that new mission, churches that are looking to enhance mission and evangelism and pursue vitality will have to plan new strategies and initiatives that go out into the community and engage the present needs. We're, like I said earlier, meeting people where they are is a huge part of being able to engage the community. And a healthy understanding of evangelism will help do that too. Another part of that casting of the new vision, will be adjusting or trimming away some existing programming to help reflect the new focus of the mission and vision. Again, when we've got limited resources, we have to use them wisely, and we have to use them in ways that will kind of help promote the engagement goals that we set for ourselves. And that part of that too means we have to engage in compelling mission work that provides a compelling story to tell. When we have compelling stories to tell, that'll make evangelizing and talking about our faith with others a lot easier. Part of this too includes an understanding of building a discipleship engagement path. I kind of went over this in, I can't remember whether it was the first or the second presentation, but it's definitely in the third presentation in the fall. So if you want to go back to that and look it over, feel free. But kind of having an understanding and an expectation of a discipleship path will help us manage our expectations, as well as help new people that are trying to engage with our church kind of have a tangible path to do so. So, you have your connection points, which in this case, are like websites, online content, word of mouth connection, our visible presence in the community as well as an important connection point. So kind of which ties mission and service together with connection. And so, using those points to make connections is huge and very important. And from that connection point, we then dive into kind of the spiritual growth aspects. We're talking about service, which is more so the mission oriented, the programmatic stuff that really gets at the spiritual growth that we want to see. We've also got faith building, which, more programming regarding like Bible studies, small group discussions, things like that. The things that really help us to kind of deepen our faith and deepen our ability to talk about our faith as well. And all that will kind of hopefully lead to a point of giving back. And that giving back point is kind of what we understand to be in an institutional and a 1950s mindset. We understand this point as, giving of time in, excuse me, I need to take a sip of water. Giving of our time to committee work, giving our talents in other ways, giving back financially, things like that, supporting the church financially. That's what kind of we understand as kind of goals in the 1950s model of church. And so many churches make the mistake of trying to take this point and like put it somewhere in right here and immediately get new connections to kind of skip over all of that and come to this point here. because, the dire situation that, the institutional churches are in. We kind of see the writing on the wall as far as money, as far as pledging, as far as, the age goes. So we kind of try to rush to this point. And, this point will come if the time and effort is placed into this point as well. We also come to growth points, and by growth points, I'm talking about, identifying areas that, are currently thriving within our community or that set us apart in the local community, and investing time, energy, and resources that might help boost engagement with those growth points within the community if they align with those needs. And kind of out of the survey, we've identified several things that, we feel set us apart, or that we feel are programs that really have a lot of importance to us. We've got Dot's Place. We've got our coverage of the soup kitchen too. We've got our interests in homelessness and food insecurity and the needs that arise out of those issues. We've got our Paris Nourish program as well. We've got our history within the community that sets us apart. And we've got our stance as an open and affirming congregation that absolutely sets us apart as well. And that brings me to kind of the last aspect of church vitality, which is energy. Pursuing vitality as a life support congregation is a marathon. Our energy resources will need to run deep if we're going to run the race. And so maximizing and supplementing and using our energy efficiently will have to be a huge part of where we go next. Which means, finding ways to maximize our existing volunteer energy through, restructuring committees and boards and those responsibilities, and evaluating existing programming and seeing where we might want to invest more or maybe cut back on more if certain programs aren't doing as well, things like that. We also have to find ways to supplement our financial energy, perhaps through renting the building out, maximizing the rental income that we can get, things like that. And then finding ways to creatively and sacrificially use the resources that we already have. Again, we come to this point of sacrifice where, we're going to have to give a little bit to, then see the engagement that we might want to, that we're trying to pursue. So, question of what's next. You guys have probably seen the comma logo that I've been using quite a bit and that the UCC uses. And so the theology behind the comma logo is that, is referring to this idea that God is still speaking, that, God is never fully understood in what has happened, and that God is continuing to reveal God's self in the present and in the future. So, where we might want to place a period, God is actually placing a comma, and the sentence and the thought is continuing. And so that's kind of the work that we have set before us, is figuring out what is beyond the comma, what is next, and what are we going to explore. Are we moving into this work of discernment, figuring out, whether our hope is to continue as is, whether we want to pursue vitality through transformation, or whether we want to pursue other paths. We are about exploring the future and discerning what we feel might be the most faithful path forward for our faith community to pursue. Today is not really about conclusions. Today is not really about answers. Today is really about a beginning and a jumping off point into this liminal space of figuring out and discerning and feeling our way through a time where, we're kind of set in a really deep fog where the future is very unclear and uncertain. So some of the ways we're going to do that, we have our upcoming discernment schedule. We've got this coming Wednesday. We're going to, time is limited today. So we've got more time to discuss what we've talked about today. this Wednesday is at 6:30. That's going to be in place of our sermon reflection group. So I'd invite you all to join us this Wednesday for more discussion on that. It's going to be a little bit more of a structured discussion than the discussion will be in a moment. And then we've got our 4 kind of path presentations that we're going to go through. We've got one at the end of this month on the 28th. That's going to be the first one that we go through. And then I've tried to stagger them so that there's one a month going from now until May. So these will be great opportunities, again, not to try and do any strategic planning and figure out, what to do next and plan, but it's more so to kind of throw ideas out there and see how we feel about them first. We're not at a point where we are making decisions and where we are creating strategies yet. We're still kind of pressing into this sense of we don't know what's next. So let's look at some possibilities and see how we feel about them and let how we feel kind of guide and dictate our decision making going forward. And all of that, as we go through all of that, we have to continue asking ourselves, these certain questions that I've kind of included in the survey report towards the end. What way forward is faithful to an aging community that's rooted in that 1950s experience that still absolutely deserves to have their needs met? Also asking what way forward is faithful to a younger generation of faith seekers whose needs are not necessarily met in a worship-centric, institutionally based faith experience. Asking ourselves too, what way forward is faithful to a future of Christian faith that will likely look very different from what we experience now too. Also asking what way forward is faithful to a bit of a fatigued group of volunteers that would have to shoulder a large load to continue meeting the needs of the existing group, while also working to create new opportunities that regularly meet and engage the needs of a group that is not already a part of our community. And then finally, what way forward is the most faithful use of our resources and assets, our spiritual resources, our volunteer resources, our physical and financial resources, all of these things. What way forward is the most faithful use that reflects Jesus' commandment to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. So I'm going to stop the sharing right now, and I am going to actually send us out into our breakout rooms right now for a little bit of group discussion. It's going to be very unstructured. So, kind of give everybody a little bit of time to speak their minds, say what's on their hearts, and then we'll come back into the larger group and kind of have that discussion again as well. I was just in Maureen's group. Maureen, is there anyone from your group and anyone from Maureen's group that would like to kind of share what was talked about within your group as best as possible? I know it sounded like there was a lot of good discussion in all the groups.
Yeah, I would be happy to share, but if there's somebody else that wants to, that would be great.
Go ahead, Maureen.
Okay. Please chime in if I miss things then. So we talked about how much of the survey was not really surprising. But one of the pleasant surprises was the number of, or the percentage of people that said they were interested in having change. And then we talked about that for a bit, and then talked about then that it was disappointing, perhaps, that then ideas about what that change might look like was not really as clear as the number of people that said they were in support of change. We also talked about the fact that it's
I'll be
a source. I'm sorry, what's that?
Nothing.
Oh, okay. Also, it's was something laudable was the number of people that had the longevity as in the church. So once people come to the church and find a home at Center Church, then they stay for the long haul. And then we talked about that as being like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, there's loyalty and community and family in the church. But then on the other hand, by having that longevity, it makes it harder to picture things to be done differently, because it's more or less how it's always been done. We talked a little bit about, Chelsea had talked with some of her cousins about people in their 20s feeling like there's not, if there were opportunities for some kind of social group in the church, that they would be interested in that kind of activity or that kind of group. And so we talked a bit about what that might look like to attract and keep younger people interested, and how that might be different from how the social groups in the church started out, which was more, especially women's groups with families at different stages that got together for social reasons. We also talked a little bit about an initiative in the past of trying to get small groups to meet in homes and to work on building spirituality, and how that kind of was a failed attempt during the time of Pastor Phil. And then we closed with talking about the fact that we try to come up with ideas, but then we might be putting the cart before the horse, and also trying to ideas about how we want our church to look, and trying not to make judgments right off the bat about what would be a good thing to have happen or a bad thing to have happen, but instead being more open to what possibilities there are to be. And instead of just clinging on to one model of what we are to be, instead looking at what we want to accomplish. And Debbie talked about, instead of having our goals be so many and so varied, trying to hone in a focus that we can all kind of be on board with. And maybe it means just two things that we're all on board with, and trying to make whatever we do meet those two things that we're all on board with. All right, anything else that I missed?
No, you did a great job.
Thank you very much.
So the next, I think the other group we had was Pam Klein. Pam Klein, you were in another group other than them. Is there someone from Pam Klein's group that would like to share?
Yes, Maggie is going to share. We appointed her.
Okay.
Yes, surprise,
Maggie?
surprise. So first off, we really want to thank God for this opportunity that is being presented to us. And this is an opportunity. We need to look at it that way, that we're going to change for the positive.
Mm-hmm.
What came up through a lot of this is the youth. We want our youth to be able to be more engaged in the church and the community. And our youth is our strength. And we need to be able to use that strength, to maximize it, not forget, not think of our youth as an afterthought. Mm. And I personally think they're willing to step up to the plate. Jack also brought up the point that maybe we need to advertise more to the youth, find out what they're reading, why they're reading it, or not even reading, but using social media more, and actually attract the youth. which may or may not attract parents. We don't know. But we definitely, as a church, need to use our social media more, because we do a lot of good works at our church, but the community does not know this. Matter of fact, they get us confused with the church down the street a lot. So we need to be able to differentiate ourselves more than just wearing a t-shirt. We also thought that we need to, I would like to learn from other churches that have transformed themselves, especially there's a couple in Connecticut, have a discussion with them how that worked, what it looked like when they were at the bottom and said, okay, we've got to change. How does that revitalization look like per se for them, knowing that not everybody's going to be the same? And we probably are going to have to combine the old with the new. And I brought up the example of Bob Bell, my husband, several other people. We're still going to have a 10 a.m. Sunday worship. That doesn't mean we can't have a 5 p.m. worship on Friday, or a coffee house on Saturday, or a jazz band on Monday, or whatever. But we do have to, I think, especially in the beginning, be able to combine some old with the new. We really think that the youth should be part of our focus, and that this is going to be a positive change that God has given us. That's my report. You guys want to add anything? I hear silence.
Pretty much covered
Yes.
it.
I would like to add that the youth, I think all of us need to feel like we make a difference, that what we're doing makes a difference. And Maggie, that was great.
We discussed in quite a lot of detail possibilities of things that would involve youth, so they not only feel like members of the church, they feel more like members of the community, and that they're sitting in an hour-long service maybe isn't the service that they need to be giving to our Lord. Maybe they need to be out on the streets doing things that make them feel more effective and be more effective.
I love the way you worded that, Pam. Thank you. All right. And the last group, is there anyone from that last group that would like to lift up a summary of what they talked about?
I got volunteered, so voluntold, as they say. We started out by just asking the general question, was there anything that surprised you or that was new to you that you didn't know before reading the report? And so a lot of our discussion did reflect what other groups have done. It revolved around the youth. One person said that she was a little surprised that kids don't want an institutional kind of experience, the same worship experience that, you know, we have all found so uplifting. And so a lot of that, our discussion talked about how to get the kids more involved, and is worship the place you want them to bring them in, or does it make more sense to bring them in through programming and mission and not through worship, that get them involved in something in the community to help others, and in that way connect with the kids, help meet the kids' needs to want to belong, and you might be able to foster more connectedness in discussions where, you know, one of the group members commented that the suicide rate is up among kids. That might be a way to bring up conversations within that, helping of others in the community, whatever the mission is, but we can also meet kids' needs kind of as a byproduct. We talked about if relaunch and rebooting is something that's to be done. It will probably be a very small group within Center Church that does that. Yep, because we still have to preserve that 1950s model for those people that it's so meaningful to. We'll try to get them to contribute as much as they can, but they may not, other than sharing ideas, may not be able to help that much. I commented that I was brought up in the 1950s model church. Center Church is the only church I've gone to since I was 5 years old. I am very willing to embrace change. I am very willing to do things differently. But because this is the only church I've ever been to, it's hard for me to know and to imagine, well, what can we do that's outside the box? So needing some guidance and some leadership there. It's not that I won't embrace change. I just can't quite imagine what it is we need to make the change. So we talked about that. We talked about, getting information from community resources, finding out what does the community need, what are the community needs, what are the needs of the youth, and talking to kids, finding out what they want. A lot of discussion about worship and, what changes might be made in worship that would entice young people to attend. But then again, we talked about, is worship the place where we want to put our efforts to bring kids in when they don't really want the same thing we wanted, and necessarily just changing music or the time of day or the day of the week may not do it. It may make more sense to change programming and mission work. We talked about anything you do is going to involve a sizable investment. Should you want to bring in the Latino community, well, then you're going to have to invest in somebody who is Spanish speaking to help meet those needs, to make the people feel welcome. And again, you're talking about a programming change and an investment there. So some of the things we talked about, we also talked about what are we willing to invest? What is the cost? I don't know, guys, is there anything else that I missed? Okay, I guess that's my book report for today.
You did very well, Barbara.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. I want to kind of open this time just for a little bit of Q&A. I want to just go for another 15 more minutes, and then I'll let you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. If there's any questions that are on the minds of people, this is a great time to lift those up.
Do you have any questions, comments?
No.
No.
None.
No.
Wow.
I have a statement. I'm bringing my lunch next time.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a good display. Thing. Bring a lunch next time.
That's right.
That's a great idea.
We'll have a lunch discussion.
Right.
Separately yet together.
Right. Mm-hmm. Any general?
I think we accomplished quite a.
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, I think we accomplished quite a lot. I think we accomplished quite a lot today. The review that you did, although it was a review, was very important, I think, to bring up some of the information that we have all read, hopefully, and digested. But it's always good to be reminded, and it did kick off and spark conversation. But I think that we have a long road ahead, and I'm very hopeful. We talked about emotions, which Maggie forgot to say, what we were all feeling during these conversations, where we mostly we came up with excitement and nervousness. And I think those are very real feelings that everybody has, and yet we can't let them become stumbling blocks. I do think that 2 hours is about the limit for the attention span of most of us here. I'll say for myself. So
Where are our knees?
I'm probably going to sign off.
I think one thing that we accomplished, it seemed like all three groups were thinking on the same vein, promoting the youth.
For sure. For sure. Anyone else? Jack, go ahead.
Connor,
Yep.
one of the comments that was made at our group, which is perhaps a little premature at this point, but at some point, I do think we should take a very close look at studying what other, quote, successful churches have done.
That's what I
Other
said.
churches
Yeah,
that have
Pam already
revitalized
said that,
themselves.
or Maggie said that.
Perhaps
Maggie
even
already
having
said
a special study to do that.
Do we know any of the churches that have accomplished that?
When we were meeting last year with Susan Murphy,
Maggie said,
she gave us a list of 8 or 10 churches in Connecticut that she felt were growing and were being revitalized. So there are some churches, perhaps not in the same type of situation we are, but there are some churches that are being, quote, successful.
Right. And I think, that's definitely something that we should look into, is seeing what strategies they're employing. Again, like I said in the presentation, it's tough to kind of take those and put them into our context and hope that they'll work in the same way. I think I've seen that list. And I think of Middletown, Southington, and Cheshire are all three of those on the list. And they're very different communities from Meriden, and part of the emphasis, again, that I've tried to make is that whatever we do going forward should very much hold Meriden in its focus. So churches like Southern, churches like Cheshire, and the churches in Middletown too, that are on that list. They're definitely things that we can learn from them for sure. But also with that in mind, that strategies from one context to another don't always translate completely. So, but I'm definitely in agreement with you, Jack, that that's something that we should definitely look at.
You're right, Connor. We're not a college town. We're not a high income suburban town. So you're right. We need to look at like communities also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Barbara Langner, did I see your hand up at one point?
Oh, I was waving goodbye to Pam.
Oh, God.
yes, because Pam's got her finger on the X.
Wait. Oh my goodness. All right. So if there's no more questions or anything, I just do want to lift up. We've got another review session Wednesday where if, in the coming days, something does pop up or bubble up, you're more than welcome to bring that there. That's kind of the point of the Wednesday sessions after these meetings, is to kind of offer another space to further process, further talk, further ask questions. And so that'll be a great space for that. So I, just welcome everybody that's been here today to come to that and share in that, and we can have some extended discussion too. I'll have some kind of questions prepared too.
Who's serving coffee, Mel?
And we all would like to thank you, Connor, for all of your hard work.
Absolutely.
Hey.
Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good
Thank you.
afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Aye.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks, Connor.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.